Hello folks, and welcome back to yet another marvelous anime video. Fantasy defines humanity as it is both the fuel and the result of our imagination, which in turn has resulted in the creation of some of the greatest works of art and science. While science has furthered our advancement in the materialistic world, art has done the same for us in a more spiritual nature. This is the reason why we have epics like the Illiad, which date back to ancient times that still survive to this day. Fantasy as a genre of art and literature has existed since time immemorial, and it's only natural that the combination of both these mediums, which we know as manga and comic books, is rife with material containing the same. In modern times, a subgenre of the fantasy genre known as dark fantasy has grown immensely popular. Dark fantasy usually marries popular fantasy themes and motifs with the dark and grim tones of gothic and horror. Stories based in the dark fantasy genre are filled with the macabre along with the fantastical. While there are many great works in this subgenre across all mediums, very few come close to replicating the impact and influence of Berserk by Kentaro Miura. It is a true standard-bearer and a seminal work in the dark fantasy genre. Ever since its inception in 1989, it continues to grow as a series to this day. While its legendary author has since passed away, R.I.P. Miura-san, his work is carried forward by a dedicated team led by Miura's close friend Kuji Mori. Berserk has really raised the bar into the stratosphere regarding what a work based in the dark fantasy genre has to aspire to be, regardless of the medium. Set against a medieval backdrop, it follows the story of Guts, a man fueled by his own demons in search of retribution for the wrongs committed against him by his former friend Griffith and his demonic minions. The world of Berserk is an unforgiving and cruel world that brings the strongest-willed individuals to their knees when faced with the laws of causality that govern it. Guts has been an anomaly since birth, going up against this esoteric force that governs this world since he first drew breath. Due to this, he's been subjected to some of the cruelest and most heartbreaking things a person can experience. In today's video, we'll be talking about 6 of these soul-crushing moments that Guts has suffered so far in the series. It wouldn't be a stretch to say that no anime/manga character has endured as much hurt as Guts has. As always, this video is going to contain massive spoilers about the series. Well, with that out of the way, fellow strugglers, prepare yourself as we strap up and dive into some of the most soul-crushing moments in Guts' life. A tragic birth and a childhood filled with violence and trauma. For someone dubbed the Struggler, Guts' life has been a struggle from the day he was born. No one knows where his parents were from or what his lineage is. For all we know, his mother was one of the countless refugees who had been killed in one of the numerous conflicts that ravaged the land at the time. Born from the corpse of a woman strung from a tree, it is a miracle that Guts survived his gruesome birth. One can even say that his birth was in defiance of the laws of causality and was a sign that this young boy would go on to shake the foundations that this world was built upon. He was discovered by a band of mercenaries led by a man called Gambino, who happened to come across the site on their journey. Despite his misgivings, he would allow a female member of his band, called Shisu, who had only recently lost her infant, to adopt this nameless baby. However, 3 short years later, Guts' adoptive mother would contract a plague and pass away, leaving the boy once again all alone in the world. Gambino, who had secretly harbored feelings for Shisu, blamed the boy for her death. Guts would begin training in the way of the sword at the tender age of 6 and would begin joining the mercenary group on their ventures not long after to earn his keep. After one particular night when the fighting had been intense, a weary, underaged Guts is brutally raped by a fiendish man called Donovan, who sneaks into his tent and violates the young boy. Guts would go on to murder Donovan during their very next raid, but he would be shattered to find out that it was none other than Gambino who had sold Guts to his rapist. While it's true that the relationship between the two hadn't been the best for a while, and it had been especially bad ever since Gambino had been crippled during a skirmish, but Guts couldn't bring himself to believe that a man who was the closest thing to a father figure he'd ever had would betray him in such a fashion. The older man's resentment towards the boy had reached a tipping point after days of physical and verbal abuse. When Guts returns with the head of the enemy's leader one day after a successful battle, instead of receiving praise and rewards, he's met with a vicious amount of ridicule and scorn. During the night, Gambino sneaks into Guts' tent and attempts to murder him. Gambino spews venom, telling Guts how he'd resented him from the moment Shisu had died, how he had sold him to Donovan for a purse of silver, and how he wished him dead and blamed him for all the misfortune that he had experienced so far. A shattered Guts retaliates and ends up murdering Gambino, then flees the only place he had ever called home, chased by his former comrades for murdering their leader. He's eventually shot and left for dead as he falls off a cliff, but little did they know that Guts had been born to defy fate itself, and so he survives yet again. By the time he hits the tender age of 11, Guts had experienced trauma that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He would develop a serious aversion to physical touch, which would linger with him for the rest of his life, along with other deep-seated scars in his psyche. The Band of the Hawk gets sacrificed, and Griffith's betrayal. If we're making a video about the most soul-crushing moments in Guts' life, then we have to mention Griffith's ultimate betrayal. After the Band of the Hawk ensured Midland's victory over the Tudor during their 100-year war, this ragtag band of mercenaries, led by their low-born leader Griffith, would finally achieve their dreams when the King of Midland granted them nobility for their deeds on the battlefield. However, one fateful night, as the Band of the Hawk and the world celebrated their newfound station, Guts overhears how Griffith didn't consider him a friend as he didn't consider him an equal. Unknown to everyone at that time, it would lead to a chain of events that would cause everything to come crashing down. Guts would leave the Band of the Hawk to find his own path so that he would become a person that Griffith could acknowledge as a friend. However, in doing so, he would lead his leader down a path of mental crisis. Griffith would begin an affair with the kingdom's princess and would be caught after deflowering her. The rage-filled, jealous monarch would strip the Band of the Hawk of their titles and honors and imprison Griffith, inflicting horrendous torture upon him. By the time that Guts returns and discovers what happened to Griffith and rescued him, his former leader had been reduced to a shadow of his former self in body as well as mind, as the continuous torture had not just stripped away his flesh, but also his soul. Despite being rescued by Guts and the Band of the Hawk, Griffith triggers his Behelit in a moment of despair, starting an event known as the Eclipse. During this event, Griffith would sacrifice the Band of the Hawk, the very people who had placed their hopes and dreams on his shoulders and had followed him to hell and back. It's a heart-wrenching scene as the characters that we've grown attached to somewhat are devoured mercilessly by the demonic apostles one by one in brutal fashion, betrayed in the end by the very man they looked up to and rescued. Out of all the scenes in Berserk, this has to be one of the most harrowing. These were characters that Guts could finally call his family after Gambino and his mercenaries. To watch them be mercilessly devoured in a wanton and nonsensical display of violence was a jarring shock to the senses of not just Guts, but the readers as well. The fact that the primary cause of this tragedy was Griffith made this all the worse. However, as we will soon find out, this would not be the greatest or worst soul-crushing moment that Guts would experience during this gory event. Guts is forced to watch his lover be sexually violated by his friend. The fifth eclipse, which can arguably be considered the single biggest event in Berserk, saw a number of absolutely tragic and macabre things take place. We already described the absolutely gut-wrenching scene of the Band of the Hawk being devoured alive by the apostles who had gathered to witness Griffith's ascension. However, the most heinous act that happens during this event has to be Casca's rape at the hands of Griffith. This is an absolutely horrific event on so many levels. Casca had been a member of the Band of the Hawk for much longer than even Guts. Therefore, it goes without saying that the bond that the two shared was much older. To absolutely betray and violate a person who's so close to you after everything you've been through together truly makes our blood boil. Despite the nature of this betrayal leading up to the Band of the Hawk's massacre, what makes this act more heinous outside of the sexual and violent nature of this act is that it was done out of pure spite and malice, as it played no part in his ascension ritual to become a member of the God Hand. He didn't need to do it, he just did. We know that while Guts' initial exit from the Band of the Hawk is largely attributed to Griffith's descent into madness, we believe it wasn't so much the act of leaving, but the nature in which he leaves. From his conversation with the princess, we know that Griffith believed Guts was not his equal. We get a sense that he might have actually been simply posturing as the leader and indeed thought of Guts as his friend, which is why his departure affects him so negatively. It could also be that Griffith was not actually lying to Casca and truly never thought of Guts as his equal, despite Guts being an absolute demon on the battlefield. There was no doubt that Griffith greatly admired Guts' skill and even saw him as having the potential of being his equal one day, but until that moment, he had never bested Griffith in single combat since their first meeting. In fact, the conditions that led to Guts joining the Band of the Hawk was his agreeing to do so after being defeated by Griffith in their very first duel. Griffith also had a grand vision of himself, which he needed to be unshakable in order to achieve his goal. His great ambition was the giant flame within which the rest of the Hawks placed their tinders of dreams and hope, so by helping him realize his dreams, they would in turn realize their own. For this reason, Griffith was forced to put on an air of infallibility and invincibility, which he couldn't drop in front of any of the other members. He had to convince others of this, and for the Hawks to fully buy it, he had to completely believe it himself. However, when he's beaten for the first time by Guts during a duel to mirror their first meeting, but this time to decide Guts' exit from the Hawks, we think it shatters this illusion that he had built, convincing himself of his invincibility. It absolutely destroys his mental stability and ruins this perfect image he had constructed of himself in his own head. The self-destructive tendencies that he indulges in following this is due to him losing his sense of self. Despite being a formidable warrior and a great leader, Griffith ultimately proves to be an extremely fragile human being. After seeing Guts, who had clearly grown much stronger when he could barely even be called a person after enduring so much torture, along with the further humiliation of being rescued by a man whom he didn't consider his equal, along with his entire mercenary group to witness it, most likely ignited a deep-seated hatred for Guts within him. He could have also, like most broken men, begun blaming his fate on Guts, firstly for placing him in that situation and secondly for abandoning him in it. This is why, while all of the Hawks are getting devoured, he decides to ravage Casca in front of Guts, knowing that the two were in love with each other and this would hurt Guts more than anything. Through this act, he intended to inflict the maximum amount of despair upon Guts. It was an act of pure evil and malice befitting one who had ascended to the ranks of the God Hand. This has to be one of the most heinous acts in the entire series, and that's saying a lot, considering that Berserk is littered with such events, each competing with each other to take the top spot. The fact that Guts had to watch the man he aspired to be like and rub shoulders with, someone he once considered a leader and a friend, violate the person he loved the most while forcing him to watch is absolutely brutal. Kentaro Miura perfectly encapsulates the helplessness, wrath, sadness, and death that Guts is feeling in that now iconic panel where he's screaming Griffith's name in a primal roar. The birth of the demon child. Following the events of the 5th Eclipse, after Casca and Guts are rescued by the Skull Knight, we realize that Casca had been pregnant the entire time. Not long after they've escaped the demonic feast, Casca gives birth to her and Guts' child. However, to everyone's horror, the baby is born severely deformed and much more self-aware than any ordinary infant. Skull Knight speculates that it was likely that the baby had been tainted in the womb due to Femto forcing himself upon Casca. The baby had accepted an evil nature. However, due to its connection to its parents, it appeared to not want to harm them. Guts, who had gone through hell just moments earlier, having had his leader betray him and rape his lover while sacrificing the rest of their comrades to demons, is simply too broken to rationally deal with having his child be tainted by Griffith's evil. Knowing that his unborn baby had not escaped Griffith's violation as well must have been a real blow to Guts. This perhaps explains why he immediately tries to kill it, as he probably believes that he is sparing it the pain and horror of being born in that state. He attempts to kill it once again, but is stopped by Casca, who, despite having lost all her memories, is driven by a pure maternal instinct to protect her child. For a man to be driven to kill his only child with almost no hesitation, regardless of the state it's born in, says a lot about Guts' emotional and mental state at this time. While there's no true justification for his actions, it's also difficult to ignore the emotional trauma that he had been subjected to mere moments ago. Guts was no stranger to the pain and horrors that life throws the way of an individual, as we all know from our earlier segment regarding his early childhood, but this had to have been one of his all-time low moments as a person. Meeting Chith, the Flower Spirit. Long before he would become the Avenger known as the Black Swordsman and set out on his quest to slay the source of all his misery, Griffith, along with all the apostles and the remaining God Hand Guts, would come across one of the purest souls in this grim, God-forsaken world. Accused of killing the only father figure in his life and chased by his former comrades, Guts is shot and falls from a height, losing consciousness. He is, however, rescued by another mercenary gang who recruits him as a child soldier after nursing him back to health. One day, after having been beaten in an important battle, Guts and his new comrades are conscripted to work as slaves by the victors to repair one of their key forts. On the way there, he makes the acquaintance of a man named Martino, who betrays him after promising to help him escape. Martino instead uses Guts as a decoy and escapes on his own, leaving the young man at the mercy of his slavers, who aren't exactly delighted by his attempted escape. Having been captured, Guts is thrown into solitary confinement, and he notices a tiny fairy-like spirit with him in the cell. Guts believes that his tired mind is playing tricks on him and making him see things that don't exist. He declares this cute, childlike spirit to be a figment of his imagination and refuses to acknowledge her existence. This spirit, whose name was Chith, is, however, excited to finally meet a human who's able to see her and starts developing an innocent bond with Guts. It's extremely heartwarming to see this cute creature interacting with our gruff protagonist. She has the appearance and mannerisms of a young innocent child and is able to heal the wounds of others. Her powers, however, are tied to the number of leaves that her flower possesses. As it dawns upon Guts that Chith has been healing him slowly, and she is indeed very much real, Guts promises to take her one day to a field of flowers that resemble her. Chith, who had been lonely all her life, is overcome with excitement and asks Guts to keep his promise to her. After this interaction, Guts passes out once again due to his wounds. However, when he wakes wakes up from his slumber, he finds only her flower, with Chith herself nowhere to be seen. Stunned, he realizes that this innocent flower spirit, in her excitement due to his promise, had expended all of her leaves in order to heal him, and in doing so had perished. When this realization dawns on Guts and the audience, it's one of the most heart-wrenching moments in the entire series. Kentaro Miura really tore out our hearts with this character's death, as she represented an unlikely source of kindness in a world mired in misery and evil. Deeply saddened by her demise, we get to see a side of Guts that's a rare sight in the series. He's filled with regret and resolves to take her flower and lay it in the field he had promised. Thanks to her sacrifice, Guts is healed back to sufficient health and is able to defeat the son of the Lord of the Fort in combat before he's rescued by the members of his band of mercenaries led by Martino. In the end, Guts finally lays down Chith's flowers amongst the flower field as he had promised in a bittersweet moment before walking to join his gang. The wind sweeps over Chith's final resting place as the kind-hearted spirit is finally able to be with others of her kind, doesn't have to be alone anymore. While Chith's and Guts' time together barely lasts even a chapter, the impact it has on both him and the audience is extremely profound. Guts restores Casca's mind, but their true reunion doesn't go as planned. The entire quest of Guts is triggered partly due to what transpires with Casca within the 5th Eclipse. She's a key individual to not just Guts, but also to the lore of Berserk in its entirety. Following the 5th Eclipse, Casca's psyche was completely shattered, and she had lost all sense of self. She was no longer the proud warrior, but an infantile being who didn't even know how to dress or form words. As much as Guts' journey is about wreaking havoc upon the creatures that wronged him, a part of it is also about restoring Casca to her former badass self. The Skull Knight warns Guts that what he wants for Casca might not be what she wants for herself, and that what he might receive in the end might not be what he expects. As Guts and his party reach Elfhelm, they discover that in this realm there is a means by which Casca's affliction might be cured. Within Elfhelm lay a road known as the Corridor of Dreams that one can use to traverse into a person's soul through their dreams. By conducting a ritual, the witch Shirke and priestess Farnace traverse this perilous dreamscape to piece together Casca's shattered soul. As they shift through the ever-changing landscape within Casca's dreamscape, aided by a hound representing Guts protecting them from a dark bird-like creature representing Femto, the two go through various trials and tribulations in order to save their comrades' souls. After witnessing the horrors of the 5th Eclipse within Casca's soul, Shirke and Farnace discover her heart, which is encased in a cage of thorns. They place this heart within a doll of Casca, which they have been piecing together throughout their journey within the dreamscape, completing the ritual and finally making their friend whole. Over the days following the ritual, Casca's memories begin to return along with her time as Elaine. She begins remembering who she truly was. However, despite the much-awaited reunion of a healed Casca and Guts, things don't go as expected. When the two star-crossed lovers finally come face to face, Casca is overwhelmed with the memories of a broken Griffith and the events that followed during the 5th Eclipse, making her scream in agony. It's made clear that even though her psyche has been restored for the most part, she was clearly not ready to face Guts, as doing so triggered memories that overwhelmed her and threatened to once again shatter her fragile soul. One cannot help but feel devastated for Guts after all he's done and gone through for her sake, to not even be able to spend a moment with her. While it might not seem much in the face of all things Guts had experienced in his life so far, love is a powerful emotion, and to not be able to be with the person one loves, despite being physically close to them, and your mere presence hurting said person, has to be one of the most tragic and painful things someone can experience. However, with the series still ongoing, one can only hope that this sad situation will eventually be remedied and the two can finally be together once again. However, Berserk is no children's fairy tale, and more often than not, people aren't so lucky as to receive happy endings. Marvelous verdict! Looking at all these horrible things that he's had to endure, Guts truly lives up to the moniker of the struggler. Less than half of the shit he's gone through could easily make a compelling backstory for a tragic protagonist in any other show. However, Berserk being what it is, they really had to put our boy Guts through the grinder. However, we believe that these soul-crushing moments in his life aren't just there for shock value, but are actually vital to this character's growth and development, as well as the story's progression. The entire premise of Berserk is that of a man going up against preordained fate ever since his birth to challenge the status quo. The world of Berserk is governed by a mysterious force known as causality, which no individual born into this world can escape. With the state of the world as it is in the series, causality results in the misery and sorrow of its denizens. Guts, being the struggler, defies this natural order, and therefore causality throws one hardship after another at him to make him submit to his preordained fate. However, due to his very nature, Guts continues to struggle against it, becoming an anomaly within the system. There's There's a ton of evil stuff that happens to characters within Berserk and in anime/manga in general, but we'd be hard-pressed to find any that have had as much misery thrown at them as Guts. As we examine these events in Guts' life, we come to realize just how complex of a character he truly is and how much Kentaro Miura had actually put into developing this character. Therefore, it's of little wonder that both Guts and Berserk are considered to be the greatest work in the dark fantasy subgenre and the entire medium. We hope that with this video, we were able to increase your knowledge not just about Guts, but about the series as a whole. We cover tons of Berserk and all of your favorite animes and mangas on our channel, from lore breakdowns to character analyses to fan theories. We've got something for everyone. Thanks for watching this video right till the end, as we cannot do what we do without your continued support, and we love doing it. Let us know what you think is Guts' most soul-crushing moment in the comments section down below. For now though, we hope to see you soon in the next one. Until then, stay safe and stay marvelous.